Hello and welcome back to another week of Cube coverage. This week we've got Yerkway's Legacy Cube as voted to be in the upcoming Cube tournament. This is quite a large cube. It's 720 cards instead of the usual 540. Quite mid-range leaning. The Firebolt in there looks very enticing. So I'm looking forward to some very mid-rangey games, a lot more 4, 5, and 6 mana spells than we're used to seeing in these kind of high-powered cubes. There's much less in the way of real fast mana or mana denial. So quite a different texture to the average vintage cube, despite sharing a lot of cards that have and could still be in a vintage cube. So nothing too overwhelming in this pack. I think the Firebolt is a very potent removal spell. Khan Liberated is a exciting card for a big mana production strategy. So if El can pick up some way to generate huge amounts of mana, or otherwise assemble some kind of very slow control deck to just get 7 lands in play the hard way, then Khan Liberated is still a very solid finisher. Otherwise, we've got Expressive Iteration, which is a seriously efficient draw spell. So very often you can play a land off of it to make it a 2 mana draw 2 with some card selection, which doesn't sound that much more above rate than a divination, but the timing and this kind of effect is just very sensitive to the mana cost, and that bit of card selection more meaningful than it might sound. So she's going with the Expressive Iteration, pretty set on playing blue-red, locking in with a gold card straight away, and Treasure Cruise is potentially a great pickup for that deck. So notorious for its interaction with the fetch lands from Odyssey, but Treasure Cruise also plays very well with cheap instants and sorceries. It's just a very low opportunity cost way to fill your graveyard. Unlike other graveyard synergy cards, the fact that it doesn't require creatures in your graveyard is just a huge advantage for it. Anything that can work off of instants and sorceries is a lot easier to assemble. Otherwise, Consecrated Sphinx, a bit of an icon of this cube, representative of the kind of mid-rangey threats that are more viable here in a slower environment. But Treasure Cruise is a very safe bet here. So she's going to want to pair it with cantrips like the Consider seen in the first pack. Expressive Iteration is a great pairing for it. Any instants and sorceries below 3 mana are going to interact pretty well with Treasure Cruise. So Magma Jet would be a pretty good option for that kind of strategy. Bitter Blossom, a card I'm generally pretty high on. Desolate Lighthouse, also quite a good land. And we see an on-color Jewel land, so... Oh, an Abhorrent Oculus also plays quite well in a spells deck. So 2 good options already. The Jewel land, Yerkway's cube has quite a low density of Jewel lands, so any non-basic lands you can pick up during the draft are more scarce than usual. So she is going with the Oculus. So also a very strong payout for having lots of cheap instants and sorceries. And a threat that can close out the game. The redundancy between multiple delve type effects doesn't get too bad until you've drawn 3 of them. Often the extra cards you draw off of the Treasured Cruise can help you refill your graveyard. And we've got a cheeky Concordant Crossroads. Technically not legal in Vintage, but got a reprint in the Mystery Booster, so here it is turning up in the cube. And the Crossroads is quite a strong fixing land. There's not much else in the pack for her style of deck. Hired Claw is much more of a fast creature-based strategy type of card. And there's some pretty good black spells here. So I could see her shifting into more of a blue-black instant and sorceries type of strategy. And yeah, looks like she's going to be passing up the Crossroads for that. Unless the ability of Crossroads to come in untapped when you're on the draw is massive. Otherwise, it would be a slightly better Evolving Wilds, but the extra mana it gives you over other dual lands, the fact that it can be played in any deck is pretty great. So it looks like she's sticking to the expressive iteration plan. If she can pick up a fetch land, it'll go great. But there's only 10 of them distributed through the cube, so very low chance that it's going to be turning up during the draft. Well, Cryptic Command is pretty nice. So, while she's loath to play expensive cards with Treasure Cruise and Oculus, the fact that Cryptic Command almost always recurs you an amount of tempo to get back the 4 mana you spent means essentially it's wasting enough of your opponent's time. It's like it's a cheap instant or sorcery despite costing 4 mana. And we see Brazen Borrower, also a very powerful blue card in general. A good card to pair with Treasure Cruise, as when you've got the card draw, you want ways to convert these extra cards into some kind of on-board advantage in the later game. Otherwise, the Beastbinder, a very strange 2-drop. I haven't seen it in action very much, but it has picked up a bit of popularity in these vintage-style cubes. It's a bit of a way to get your other non-evasive creatures through, but Brazen Borrower, just a very powerful blue card. Great rate. And speaking of relics from the past, we have Muldrifter hanging out here. A card that scales pretty well with the format. I think even in fairly modern cubes, it does alright. These kind of effects tend to keep up with changes in the metagame. But Young Pyromancer, another card that fits very well with the cheap spells theme, and the landscape there would be really good fuel for Oculus and Treasure Cruise if she wants to pick it up, but a landscape that can only get one of your colors is pretty rough. At best, it lets you bank a mana for when you're casting Treasure Cruise, but you really don't want to be spending actual mana on the Treasure Cruise. You want to be getting a refund on spells that you are happy to cast regardless. So Treachery is a very powerful removal spell. Often suffers a lot in the formats it's legal in because 4 and 5 mana creatures are just not playable anyway. But if you can Treachery a 4/4 or anything better, it is a massive blowout. That's the kind of effect that you're pretty happy to pay 3 or 4 mana for regardless. But otherwise, there's Deprive, which works a lot better with the cards that she's picked up so far. Counterspells, good with Brazen Borrower. Triggers the Young Pyromancer, goes to the graveyard faster. So, leaning in on a more synergistic card. And these blue-red spells decks, they can sometimes be in danger of getting quite threat light, especially in powerful cubes, as you often can only find 4 or 5 good threats, and if your opponent can deal with them, your deck will wind up just spinning its tires all game. So quite good that she's picked up the Oculus and the Brazen Borrower and the Young Pyromancer so early. So that aspect of the deck is covered pretty well, and then she can focus on cantrips, counterspells, cheap removal spells, and counterspells matching up quite nicely in this cube. I think there's a lot of cards that are quite weak to counterspells. And the cheap creatures that are normally a weakness of blue are not quite so influential in this cube. And leaning pretty heavily on the blue side. So in formats with low mana fixing like this, it's quite a marginal thing to do, but there's value to be gained in leaning heavily on one color, biasing your mana base heavily towards one of your two basic lands, and that minimizes the amount that you'll be color screwed if you are playing two colors. Especially with cards like Deprive and Brazen Borrower that cost multiple blue mana. So we see some decent green and black cards being passed around. Looks like no blue-red in the pack at this point. Spellskite functionally only cares about colorless mana, really. But picking it up as some more protection for our threats. So with only 2 red cards in our pool, I could see a pivot into some kind of blue-black, more reactive strategy. Red often pairs very well with Treasure Cruise because the lightning bolt type effects and counter spells together, they can cover quite a wide range of cards that you need to react to. But especially in the recent sets, black has quite a lot of cheap removal as well. Cards like Cut Down, Fatal Push, Bloodchief's Thirst. Thoughtseize type effects, also something that ostensibly plays pretty well with Treasure Cruise, but suffers a little bit as they can be bad in a longer game. But the power level of Thoughtseize in a format like this is high enough that you're not too concerned about the risk of top decking it later in the game. So viable reasons to move into blue-black if it continues to be getting passed in the packs. Adding green, quite unlikely to happen, as green doesn't have much that plays well with Treasure Cruise or Abhorrent Oculus, so I think almost impossible we'll see her moving into a green deck. And Mockingbird, a very strange card. I've only played with it on a few occasions and never quite known how to make the most of it, but it is generally a pretty decent card. A fantastic pairing with Abhorrent Oculus, once you can get it down. Mockingbird is a very cheap way to copy it. So I think it'll be a couple of moving parts to make the Mockingbird good, but when it is good, it'll kind of help her run away with the game. If she's got 2 young Pyromancers or 2 copies of some other synergistic creature, then that'll make a big difference. But the pack so far still been pretty light on the cantrips. We'd like to see the Consider come back around or some other 1-mana draw spells. Oh, Rona is pretty nice as well. And lots more green being passed, so looks like no one at the table is interested in drafting green. But these green cards also quite replaceable, so very easy to make a misjudgment on reading signals in situations like this. While there are 4 green cards in the pack, none of them are cards that I would rate very highly, so it's not necessarily an indication that more good green cards will be coming later. And especially in formats with quite a wide power level, it also can mean that the green cards you're getting past later on are not actually worth changing your draft strategy to accommodate. So packs come back around and the Consider is gone, which is unfortunate, but unsurprising that someone's picked that up. Flare of Duplication are quite a strange card. It can definitely perform quite well when things line up and can be quite good with Treasure Cruise, as that often gives you bandwidth to copy it, but just picking up Khan Liberated as another big threat. And Avacyn's Pilgrim, however, would be a reason to be playing green, but she's locking in with the Desolate Lighthouse. Lighthouse, utility land, I rate quite highly, I think. The times when you can use it, it makes a big difference, and especially with her deck leaning quite heavily towards blue, she can afford to play a colorless land or two. And ideally, if the Cryptic Command comes around, that would also be a great pickup. But the packs are dry enough that I would be surprised to see much impressive coming around. Between the signals that other drafters are in blue and red and the quality of the cards that she's passed in general. This will be a draft format where you really need to pick up the key cards for your deck in the first 8 or 9 picks, as things will be drying up quite a lot after that. And Lost GT, not the kind of thing she's in the market for. It goes alright on the Brazen Borrower, but otherwise you need quite a few cheap evasive creatures. Nothing else here particularly enticing. Duress is an alright sideboard card if she wants to go blue-black, and it looks like she is picking it up in case. And Shardless Agent, a very powerful card. If there has been a reason this draft to play blue-green, it would be Shardless Agent. But very unlikely either card is going to make her deck, as she's pretty locked into blue-red, and black would be a more viable splash than green, I think, for synergizing with the cards that she's picked up. Duress actually quite a good fit for her strategy. I could see her playing at main deck if she does wind up in blue-black. And, oh, Izzet Charm is very nice. Izzet Charm is a very efficient card. All 3 of the modes come up pretty often, and they're all modes that you don't mind paying a little bit extra for. So I really like it here. Otherwise, Reckoner Bankbuster, pretty good in these kind of decks full of reactive instants and sorceries. And Glorybringer, Paragoyf is also a very powerful card. It's a bit redundant on what she's picked up so far, so this isn't the ideal time in the draft to be picking it up. But compared to a lot of the other cards in the cube, it's just way above rate. Paragoyf is a monster in Vintage Cube, and in these below Vintage Power level cubes, I can't imagine it gets much worse. Otherwise, Search is another card that plays very well with cheap instants and sorceries. So picking up the Search, leaning more into a control strategy, and the fact that Search can self-mill you also works quite well with the Treasure Cruise and Oculus. And this card selection, if she can't pick up enough cantrips, then Search will fill out that aspect of her deck. It's not the ideal way to do it, but it may be the way she has to make do if she's not getting past the Brainstorms and Preordains. So Wren's Resolve is quite nice. This is the kind of cheap card draw that you want. Subtlety, also quite a powerful card. Pairs well with other counterspells, as it's quite viable to just flash it out as a flying threat if your opponent's not playing into your counterspells. Otherwise, Stoke the Flame's a pretty good removal spell. She doesn't have any red damage spells, so this is shoring things up a bit. And some consideration to the other blue and red cards in the pack. Subtlety and Wren's Resolve, both definitely cards worth considering in this situation. And weighing them up against each other, so Stoke would be the first red burn spell she picks up, which is filling a relevant hole. Otherwise, Subtlety is a 0 mana spell a lot of the time, so and agonizing over it. Subtlety, also much easier for her to cast in a deck, leaning heavier on the blue side. And we see quite a lot of white cards this time. So the signals in pack 2 are often inverted from the signals in pack 1, depending how likely your other drafters are to move into the open colors. So while there's a lot of good white spells being passed here, I wouldn't take this as an indication that she'll be getting any good white spells in pack 3. So might just be picking up the Sphere of the Suns or even the Surveil land. But looking at the Darkstar Augur here, so some consideration for playing black. There has been tons of black being passed around. The Augur is pretty good. The Scarab God would be good, but she's pretty overloaded on the top end. And the only considerations outside of black would be Sphere of the Suns, and Elegant Parlor would be quite a rough card to include. It's quite inefficient if you don't need the white mana. So she is picking up the Sphere of the Suns. These mana generation spells often playing quite well with the card draw and card selection that blue provides. And we have another threat with the Engineer. Pien Kiran Noir, a card that is more powerful than it looks, but Electrolyze, yeah, looks like a great fit for a deck. She needs the card draw, she needs the spells. She needs ways to deal with small creatures. And it's generally just hard to turn down a multicolor card that you can cast, as it's a pretty good heuristic that you should take them when you see them. And Arc Trail, also a pretty good card. Flametongue Yearling, quite powerful. She might struggle with the double red, depending how her mana base shakes out. Blood Cryptid, quite speculative. Flame Slash, Burst Lightning, and wow, that is a lot of great red cards being passed. I see 4 or 5 red cards that I would be quite happy playing in this situation, so very strong sign from our left that no one is playing red there. And these are all quite strong cards, so it really just depends on what part of the deck she's hoping to shore up. The Burst Lightning and Flame Slash are just very cheap interaction. Swift Spear is another threat, and she is going with the Swift Spear. And we're back to more white being passed around. Dreamtide Whale is a very strange card. I'm not sure if she'd have it in consideration here. But a lot of the time, it's just a 3-mana 7/5 with a minor drawback. If she can get the cantrips and cheap spells together, then she can proliferate it often enough that it doesn't die. But a 3-mana 7/5 still not necessarily worth the work. So picking up the Fountain Port here, it's a very slow mana sink, quite similar to the Desolate Lighthouse. Making treasure in an emergency is actually pretty relevant. It can be useful mana fixing if games really drag out and you just have 1 or 2 red spells you need to align, or maybe even a black spell that you're splashing. But she's got to be a little bit careful with the colorless lands. I think 2 is already a pretty high number if you want to be casting Expressive Iterations on turn 3 reliably. And unfortunately, still no blue 1-mana cantrips being passed around. Those are really high priority for almost any blue deck, and especially here, being able to exploit them is one of the key reasons to be playing the Oculus and Treasure Cruise. And even off Expressive Iteration, they often let you line it up so that you don't have to be playing a land off of it. And filling out the curve, that Deprive going to be putting some serious work in, as she's got a lot that wants her to play this counterspell protection game. So Hellrider, not ideal for her deck. She doesn't have enough tokens and small threats or evasive creatures. Venza, an alright card. Incinerate, also a good fit as a cheap removal spell. It is possible, even in these decks, to overload on the cheap burn and wind up with a bunch of useless cards if your opponent doesn't cooperate by playing cheap creatures worth removing, but she's low enough on the removal spells that Incinerate is still a really good addition to her deck. And some consideration for the Overlord. So the Self-Mill is a more costly but more expedient way to fill up the graveyard. It's very rough playing 3 colors in this cube. So she's just picking up the Incinerate. Oh, Light Up the Stage is good. So this is not always 1 mana, but frequently enough 1 mana that it'll cover that role in her deck. She really needs the card draw. She's got actually an alright number of 2 and 3 mana creatures that can get it activated. And Chandra, an alright card, but not the most powerful 6-drop in this cube, and quite redundant with a lot of what she's picked up. If she wants a big non-creature threat, she's already got Karn. She's already got the Azcanta endgame, so... And yeah, Incinerate, really crucial piece here. Often the only way that you can beat a blue counterspell deck is by getting a cheap creature in and making things awkward for them. So Incinerate, protecting her from that is one of the reasons that blue-red is such a classically powerful and synergistic color combo. And even when these burn spells get redundant or don't line up right, she's got the looting, she cares about damaging her opponent. Pyrosurfer, another awkward card that is implying a larger creature count than she's got, but Memory Deluge is quite nice. She's got a couple ways to get it in the graveyard without casting it if she wants to do that, but a 4-mana draw 2 at instant speed, just the kind of thing that her deck is interested in regardless. And here we've got more black coming around. Grim Lavamancer is typically really good in these spells decks, as it's another card that can consume any card in your graveyard as a resource. But she's a little bit overloaded on that kind of effect. The Oculus and the Treasure Cruise are already pretty hard to line up. So she's really going to need to draw the cheap spells to get her cards online. And Inferno Titan and Izzet Charm made it back around. So Inferno Titan, a card that is still quite good, but Izzet Charm a better fit for a deck. And looks like she agrees. So the spell pierce effect, when it's good, you're quite happy to pay the extra to have it. The shock quite reliably good, and the draw 2 discard 2 is probably the rarest mode to use. You're never that thrilled to use it, but the fact that it is always castable for that mode is a nice backup plan. And good white cards still being passed around, but Pien Kiran Nalaar is really nice. Pien Kiran Nalaar is a card that does a little bit of everything, and importantly is basically impossible to interact with. The Thopters can't be blocked. Removal is very rough against it. It plays defense well, and it deals with problematic creatures. So while it doesn't look very appealing, it is a really irritating card to see on the other side of the field a lot of the time. Believe it or not, a card that used to show up in Modern every now and then. And a deck review going into the third pack. She's got a pretty high playable count considering the difficulty getting past blue and red spells in the first pack. And with the low land count in the cube, she's going to still be pretty happy to pick a land over a spell. And almost any 1-mana instant or sorcery is going to be good for her deck. So if there's a lightning bolt floating around, a cantrip, a brainstorm, anything like that. And between Grim Lavamancer, Izzet Charm, and Incinerate, I think she's very well positioned against small creatures. The Deprive and the Subtlety are going to be working very hard to deal with the larger threats. But she's got the card selection to find them when they're relevant. She's got ways to close out the game before these big threats or planeswalkers can get going. And last pick Seasoned Pyromancer, that's not bad. I think she'd be pretty willing to play that. When you're playing a strategy as full of interaction as blue-red is, these 1/1 tokens can actually represent real threats, as it's challenging for your opponent to assemble a big creature to block them. And of course, it's got explicit synergies with all of the graveyard stuff she's got going on. She can discard flashback spells, set up a treasure cruise, mill it with Search for Azcanta. So, as is usually the case with these blue-red decks, she's very much looking for the cantrips, looking for the counter spells. Abrade is quite nice here. It's a little redundant, as she's got quite a lot of that cheap burn, but still a card worth adding. And Reckless Impulse and Fall from Favor. Fall from Favor, actually a great fit for our deck. Pairs very well with the cheap red removal. And depending how her draw shakes out, she can just get it down turn 3. It'll take over the game. But going with the Crawler here, so this is another 3-mana threat, doesn't need to attack to close out the game. A good way to draw more spells to get into the graveyard. So, Mind Stone and Burn Down the House, alright options. Burn is quite a weird card when she's playing so many creatures, but there's situations where it can catch you right back in the game. Otherwise, Rishadan Port, a card I'm a big champion of. I think almost any deck you can often set up a situation where Rishadan Port against an opponent who drew 3 lands is just lights out, game over. Especially in a format with so little fixing, it's quite easy to color screw your opponent and then they can just never cast half the spells in their hand. But picking up the Faithless Looting, so something that more explicitly synergizes with what her deck's got going on. Cursed Mirror, a very strange card. Basically a mana rock that sometimes deals a bunch of extra damage. Oh, an on-color Jewel Land is very tempting. I was ready to consider an off-color Surveil land just for synergies with what she's got going on. Vedalken Shackles is also a very powerful card. It's quite obnoxious to steal a creature at instant speed, and to be able to repeatedly steal creatures, it means that if your opponent only has creature removal, you can kind of force them to remove their own creature just to avoid dying, and then you can steal something new with the Shackles. It's a nightmarish card to play against as long as the game goes on long enough. But a Jewel Land is just a very important card for this format. She's got plenty of spells, so if she added a new spell to her deck, she'd probably be cutting something quite playable in order to run it. Well, Snapcaster Mage is quite nice. Just a general spells card, plays well with cheap situational spells, but there's also another dual land. So with the number of spells she's got, any on-color dual land is a very tempting proposition. Unlikely she's going to see another one for the rest of the draft. So, picking up the Snapcaster Mage further cements Deprive as a real load-bearing element of her deck. I can foresee a lot of games where it'll hinge on her casting Deprive even twice to lock the opponent out of playing their 4, 5, and 6 mana spells and letting her run away with the early advantage she's gained from cheap removal spells and cheap threats like Young Pyromancer. And Batterskull, not a card most people think of playing without Stoneforge Mystic. Could be alright as a threat in her deck. But Repeal and Dig Through Time, both quite good options. And Fire Blast also here for a more aggressive approach, and Ancestral Visions. Ancestral Visions is a strange card. It's easy to imagine the times where it's bad, but I found it to really outperform expectations. And Repeal, quite a strange card to evaluate. It's brutal against tokens. It's a pretty good hedge if you've got expensive instants like counterspells. But picking up the Dig Through Time, so more card draw here. And lots of ways to spend mana at instant speed. So quite likely we'll see some 4 mana subtleties come down as a 2-for-1, which is, in my opinion, the way that you want to be using that card in draft. Well, Vendilion Clique is also a pretty nice threat. Unfortunately, no instants or sorceries here. Trumpeting Carnosaur is quite overcosted as a removal spell, and she's got a lot of cards she doesn't want to discover into. Smoldering Egg can be a nice threat, but she's actually doing pretty well for 2 and 3 mana plays. The Smoldering Egg does have a interesting interaction with Delve, where the Delved spell, you do have to spend mana to get the counters, but the fact that you can effectively pay any amount of mana you want, you can deliberately exile fewer cards in order to pay more mana and get counters on the egg faster. Which is not very mana efficient, but it adds a little bit of flexibility. Oh, another dual land is very nice. Otherwise, Crater Maker and War Boss, both pretty decent cards. There's some appeal to the Crater Maker as it goes to the graveyard faster, but it's also getting a bit redundant. She's got a pretty good amount of small creature removal. I think what she'd really hoped to get past in these last couple of picks is more card draw and things to do while the graveyard is empty. There's quite a lot of cards that only come online once she's got quite a few cards in the graveyard. And if her late game plays are Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time, she needs something that plays well in the late game to find with them, often in the form of a bounce spell or a counter spell. Sphinx of Forgotten Lore, quite a weirdo card. Well, Thirst for Discovery is the kind of card draw I could see her going for. So this card advantage plus selection is a good pairing because often when you've drawn 3 cards, you've found something that you're pretty happy to discard. Which obviously you want it to be a basic land most of the time, but there's situations where you're happy to discard 2 spells to Thirst for Discovery. And a completely off-color landscape. A very late Tinker, so she definitely doesn't have the density of artifacts to line that up at this point. She's got a couple of artifact tokens, but not too much else. Into the Roil is a nice pickup. That's the kind of bounce spell that you want to pick up off of your Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Times. And Overlord also a pretty good draw spell. Tough choice between that and Into the Floodmoor. So I think this decision depends a lot on how fast she sees the game shaping up. The Overlord obviously playing a lot better in a longer game, but Into the Floodmoor does a better job at setting up her delve effects. And Reckless Impulse, just more good card draw. This is exactly the kind of thing that she was hoping to wheel out of this pack. And unlikely we'll see much else come around. The amount of black being passed, it's quite unlikely that a good blue or red monocolor spell is going to make it this late in the draft. But I could see an off-color Surveil land making it into the deck. It doesn't pair so well in blue-red as you often have 1-mana plays that you'd rather be doing on turn 1, but the opportunity cost of it is so low that these Surveil lands are really quite powerful. And I think a bit of preemptive deck building here, reviewing what's in the upper echelon of cards she's picked up so far and how the distribution is of different effects. So with the iteration, Experimental Frenzy, and Wren's Resolve, she wants to keep her curve very low, as she'll often be exiling cards that need to be cast urgently. And this is where Snapcaster Mage looking very nice, because with those effects, you don't want to play a lot of counter spells, but Snapcaster Mage is a way to have another copy of Deprive that you're fine exiling with Experimental Frenzy. Same with Subtlety. That's a card where if your opponent doesn't cooperate, you're pretty willing to just flash it out on their end step. Oh wow, that is a incredibly good pickup for second last, and Fireblast even a card that could conceivably make the main deck, so very nice for those last 2 picks there. And we'll hop into the first match. We've got L on the left and RL on the right. Starting things off with the Surveil land. And looks like a keep there. Looks like Elle's got quite a lot of card draw in her starting hand, settling in for a slower, longer game. Gonna get good mileage out of Desolate Lighthouse as the game pans out. And I think some consideration towards an early Faithless Looting, so represents a lot of setting things up, but you've got to be mindful of what you're looking to draw or to discard before casting it. So this can do a lot of setup work towards the Oculus. Gets 3 cards in the graveyard if she's willing to exile the Faithless Looting. And with a light up the stage next turn, she might just be looking to chain together some card draw and card filtering and settle in for a long game. So likely to be ditching the Monastery Slitspear here. Quite awkward with the blue heavy draw. But getting rid of the Into the Royal. And as long as the game stays slow, she's got the tools to get a little card advantage, hit land drops, and eventually deploy the slow threat. So a 3-drop out of Ariel here. General Crete, one of the slower 3-mana red creatures, still generates value if it's unchecked. And starting with some more card draw. Both of these, pretty good cards in general. Quite awkward to be casting them on turn 4. The Grim Lavamancer is a little slow, and it's quite awkward having this density of play from exile effects, as the expressive iteration itself is quite sensitive to timing. And rough to see Ariel resolving Agonti here. This is one of the cards that counter spells are often the best way of dealing with, as the body blocks quite well. You don't want to spend a removal spell on it. It's just a efficient 2-for-1 that's quite hard to interact with outside of the fact that it's quite expensive. So Ariel's managed to untap with the Goblin here, which is nice. He's going to get a free token. He gets 1 damage to L off of the trigger. So 2 damage from the Goblin, 1 damage from the first trigger, 1 damage from the Gonti coming in. And a bit of an awkward turn. She's got 2 slower cards she'd really like to deploy this turn. But leaving this Goblin unchecked represents a lot of extra value for Ariel. So leading off with the iteration, looking to hit a 1-mana card here to keep up on the board. The Monastery Slitspear is pretty good, but she doesn't have the 2nd red mana to cast it and the Lavamancer, so a mountain here is quite nice. Or there's some utility to taking a Mockingbird, so if she has a blue land, she can... With the blue from the Jewel land, she can play the Mockingbird and the Grim Lavamancer to have 2 Grim Lavamancers, and then she's got the means to start shooting down anything up to 4 toughness. But that'll make her Oculus quite redundant. So just taking the mountain here. So Lava-Manta are going to be really good against all these small creatures if she can untap with it. And even the Monastery Soot Spear as a 1-2 does an alright job at blocking the tokens. And we've got a removal spell here, so good way to utilize these tokens and Gonti body that are otherwise quite irrelevant. Oh, and this is one of the typical weaknesses of blue-red is if their opponent has a couple of creature removal spells, it's quite a it's a deck that's quite reliant on having its synergistic creatures surviving. So the Bloodchief's Thirst and the bring down here are preventing Elle from really getting her synergies going. As the Lava-Manta would be clutch in this situation. So she'll want to line up some way of either removing the goblin or just setting up some good blockers. The Abhorrent Oculus is ready to go, and that is a really good card for blocking. She gets a guaranteed 2/2 out of it, even if Ariel's got a removal spell. So it's gonna be clutch in this situation. And he's really only got a 1 turn window to remove it, as once the Mockingbird comes down, things are going to spiral out of control. So on Ariel's upkeep, El gets to Manifest Dread. Makes a 2/2. Oh, and this is nice with all of the creatures he's got in play. So what was previously a pretty rough attack, he can represent quite a lot of extra damage. The damage doubling means that El takes 2 damage just from it coming into play, but he's going to hold off for a turn. So with Soulhorn Nemesis, she's effectively on 12 life. She's going to have a ton of ground blockers, but if Ariel has any way of dealing direct damage, he can relatively easily push through the last 6. The Bolt Bringer's second ability is going to be a big problem here. So, getting a copy of the Oculus here, she's going to be making 2 extra creatures every turn. It's pretty rough to send in the Oculus itself this turn, as she'd have 4 blockers. I guess that is a ton of defense, so and as long as Ariel's not chaining together a bunch of token spells, it's going to be hard for him to deal with the last 12. So that's 2 more damage, most importantly, and the Void trigger is going to be able to produce more tokens, so he can start sending in goblins, getting a 2/2 each turn. But he's only got 1 more turn to do it in. He's dead in 2 turns to the Oculus is in the air. However, the lifelink on his big creature is going to be doubled, so he can send that in for an extra 8 life, which will buy him an extra turn. If El can't deal with the Bolt Bringer, she's going to really struggle to survive this onslaught. So the Bolt Bringer triggers to get another token. Not sure where the card's coming from. So Elegy Acolyte is only combat damage, does not trigger off of the Bolt Bringer. resolving some interactions here with the Sawhorn Nemesis doubling damage. And looks like L deals 10 in the air. That's game one. Unless a lot of, I think a lot of confusion about things missed in terms of damage doubling and other interactions. So just restoring the board state. Going through L's turn as and she's got the mana for subtlety and electrolyze here. So she's got a lot of tools to control the last few turns of the game. She'll have 2 extra blockers on Ariel's turn, so plenty of chump blockers for his large creatures. And starting things off with a loot with the Desolate Lighthouse. So Snapcaster Mage doesn't have a huge amount to get back, but what it does represent is a bit of extra damage with an Electrolyze if she wants to go that route. So leave everything back this turn. Swing for effectively 14 in one turn as a bit of a surprise lethal. And so even if Ariel can piece together removal for both of the Oculuses, she's got the last 4 points lined up in the form of burn. And Deprive, actually quite a relevant card to have milled here. So we've got a Nahiri's Warcrafting going after the Oculus. A complex interaction with the Sawhorn Nemesis doubles the damage, so 5 cards get exiled and 1 can be played. So we're just resolving that interaction here. And looks like he's setting in with all, trying to get across the last few points. The Elegy Acolyte represents an extra 4 life, but what Elle can do here is chump block the Acolyte and electrolyze her own creature to deny the lifelink. But just going for the safer route here, I think taking out the tokens, chump blocking all of the remaining creatures. And then if she can piece together one more point of damage, then Snapcaster Electrolyze can deal the last points. So if she leaves one of these creatures unblocked, then she'll have a 2/2 left over to deal the last points. Although with the Void trigger of the Acolyte making a 2/2, that makes it more complicated. So I think the only burn she's got is the Electrolyze, which will only deal 2. So she'll need to line up the last point somehow. Or otherwise go for a Treasure Cruise, find the Incinerate, and finish things off that way. Oh, the Haste and Prowess. So she can flash back into the Floodmaw, get the Prowess trigger. That gets in for the last 8. And without the damage doubler, she's much less in danger of just instantly dying here. So taking out the Acolyte, preventing the lifelink, and dealing with his biggest threat. And also resolving this Abhorrent Oculus trigger. The Mockingbird on Oculus proving to be a really dominant force in this game. So resolving another mistrigger for the LG Acolyte. A bit of retroactive blocking. But regardless, I think the game's over unless he's got an answer for that Oculus. And game one goes to L. She'll be on the draw game two, which can be quite rough for blue decks. But if she can get a good engine going early, a lot of her tools line up quite well against this kind of creature deck. So starting with some setup again, hitting land drops. Looks like she needs to find a blue source, so going to be pretty happy to discard some of these redundant blue spells. And setting in with the Prowess creature, if she can back this up with some burn and bounce spells, it's pretty easy for this to go for the full 20. Or at least a significant chunk of Ariel's life. And she's got the awkward setup of Spectacle plus Prowess, a spell you'd love to be casting before combat to get the Prowess trigger, but also great to be casting post-combat to get the discount. But looks like she's just starting with setting up the Grim Lavamancer. That's a huge tool against a creature deck like this. But feeling the pain of this colorless land, if it made either blue or red, she'd have a lot more options available to her. Choked on both colors of mana. With the Deprive currently languishing in her hand, but likely to line up quite well this game as Ariel's behind on the board and he's going to need a high impact 4 or 5 drop to catch up. So she can really lock him out of the game with the counterspell. And the Emberheart Challenger really good here for setting up the Spectacle. She can find an island, get the Deprive online, lock him out of the game. And we've got a pre-combat light up the stage for the Prowess trigger. Oh, and 2 nice hits. So, unfortunately, still quite constrained on blue mana. That's 4 blue spells now that she'd like to cast. 1 island, the Deprive uncastable. But the bounce spell is also got a good shot of dealing with whatever 4 mana permanent Ariel can use to catch up in the game. Oh, looks like hasn't hit the 4th land, hasn't got a mountain, importantly. The lack of fixing lands in this cube really showing in this match. Both players a little bit color screwed. But with all of the card filtering, cheap spells, and a threat already on board, L's making the most of the situation with both players locked out like this. And leaving up the Izzet Charm, so if he's got a big sweeper or planeswalker, she can deal with that. Oh, and an Elegy Acolyte. A rare blind spot for Izzet Charm. It's gotten to be too late in the game. It might be just cashed in for the card filtering. So starting with the loot with the Desolate Lighthouse, trying to hit a blue land to unlock a lot of the spells stranded in her hand. And there's the Draconautics Engineer. Tough to activate with how constrained Ariel is on mana. But these threats are really threatening to turn the game around. Especially with the lifelink on the Elegy Acolyte. I was really drawing to that into the Floodmaw to try and deal with the Acolyte, as it's out of the range of almost all of her burn. Oh, she has found a Jewel Land. But too late for the Deprive, which is rough. Ariel's had a more cooperative draw and managed to deploy his big cards before El could close out the game. These reactive cards really struggling in the face of all of these deployed threats. So Ariel can make a 4/4 flyer here, give it haste, and Deprive does not interact with this either. So sending in the big creatures, some consideration to whether he's concerned about El blocking with the 2/2. And Prowess can give it a good block on the Seer Slicer Goblin as well. But he's pushing through so much damage, it is unlikely to matter here. So in for 8, gains 8 again. Sorry, gains 4 off of the Acolyte. So pitching Magma Jet to cast Pyrokinesis, but she's got the Izzet Charm at the ready, and this is about as good as it's going to get. Izzet Charm really losing its window in the game here, and the looting mode normally the out in this situation, but redundant with the Desolate Lighthouse doing the card selection for her. Or she's got the Into the Floodmaw, which deals with the dragon, but she's so far behind on board. It's really rough here. So Mockingbird copies the Acolyte, which represents a lot of potential life gain. And with the Mockingbird having flying, she's happy to bounce the Acolyte. Oh, and another removal spell. Once again showing the vulnerability of these blue-red strategies to having their key creatures removed. As they are priced into having quite a small quantity of them. So, setting in the dragon at minimum. And getting a chump block here. El's counterspells been stranded in her hand as the mana troubles have given her a lot of difficulty in deploying them. So, due to time constraints, this will be the last game of the match, as unfortunately we ran out of time in the round. So Fire Blast takes care of the dragon. And winds up in a draw. So, as both players drew, we're moving on to Leo versus Minier, as they are still in contention to go 3-0. Leo starting off with a red-white tap land. And Minier pretty happy to just play draw go. Looks like he's put together some kind of blue-white control deck. Leo also playing a very high density of creature removal. So, if Minier can avoid committing a creature to the board, just lean on his removal spells, he should do quite well here. And looks like Leo's got a bit of a toss-up between Luminarch, Aspirant, and Reckless Pyrosurfer. Aspirant, usually the better one to lead off with, but he's got to be wary of how he exposes his cards to Minier's interaction. And Malcolm is a nice threat here. Going to help Manir to hit his land drops. And find the creature interaction he needs to break up Leo's game. So and a Guide of Souls here. Just going to get sniped with a Mana Leak. Mana Leak often quite an awkward card against these low to the ground decks, so I think Manir quite happy to just get the Mana Leak out of his hand as soon as possible, especially with a Path to Exile there, meaning that it's likely he'll be getting Leo up to a high land count as the game progresses. And lots of options here, so he'd like to deploy the Kavu and deal with the Malcolm. He's also got some consideration to leaving the fetch land for the Pyrosurfer, but that would cost him quite a lot. And it looks like he's going to be flashing Infelia on Manir's end step. So getting some more card filtering here. Manir's got a ton of good spells in hand. I like his shot of playing defense here. He's going to have to fire off the Path to Exile fairly soon. And I think some consideration for plotting this flyer here, as next turn he'd be able to bring it in as a large creature. Oh, and Leo's holding onto the fetch land for the Pyrosurfer, so trying to maximize the Battlecry triggers on that. So he wanted to get a fetch. He wanted to get a tap land in order to. Likely his only white source he can get off the Bloodstained Mire, and gets him a little bit of filtering here. And it doesn't look like Leo has got a removal spell for a large creature. So if Manir can deal with the Aspirant and then get down the Dust Animus as a 4/5 flying lifelink, then that's going to take over the game. Lingering Souls, maybe a cheeky Black Splash there. Oh, and it gets sniped by the Mana Tithe. That's a huge tempo play. Deals with the last of Leo's threats, and a lot of the cards left in his deck, in his hand, aren't going to play well from an empty board. If Manir's got any kind of late game to get going, he's going to be able to take over here. Oh, a Monastery Mentor. Unfortunately, coming down after a lot of Manir's spells. So this isn't going to match up too well against Leo's hand. And Leo really spoiled for choice on his options here. He's got a kicked Kavu, so in case Minier does have a prowess trigger, he can guarantee the kill, but nothing to follow up the Mentor with. Draws a Jace Vryn's Prodigy for the turn. Another card that matches up pretty poorly here. Oh, Palace Jailer. This is adding a lot of tension to the game. Leo's got a lot of haste threats. He's got the Bivouac, and he's got the removal, so I could really see him stealing the Monarch here. He's in a pretty good position for it. And very often, if you manage to steal the Monarch after a Palace Jailer, the game is all locked up. It's quite hard to come back from your opponent taking the Monarch and getting their best creature back. But he hasn't got the means to guarantee it this turn. He can play the Pyrosurfer and force the trade, but that's not how he wants to line things up. He can force the chump block with the Bivouac, but if Minier sets up any way to deal with the Bivouac later, then it's going to really punish Leo for not spending his mana on spells when he's got such a spell-heavy draw. But just going in and forcing the chump block here. Fortunately, it'll be quite hard for Leo to play a removal spell and animate the Bivouac next turn, so unlikely he's going to be taking the Monarch next turn. Manier's going to guarantee the third card out of it, and this could be the breathing room he needs to lock Leo out of combat and get out of this extremely risky position. So, plotting the Dust Animus. If he finds a 5th land, he'll be able to get it untapped. He can combine it with Ojutai. All he needs is an untapped land off the top, and he's going to be sitting very nice here. With the Hexproof Ojutai being practically lights out against Leo. Oh, but it does look like Leo has the means to take back the Monarch. He can remove Jace for 3 mana, play the hasty Pyrosurfer, get in. His Kavu will not be at its best as it won't have a target. Oh, but Adeline. This is a much nicer way to do it. So Minier will actually want to chump block here, as otherwise his Jace would be killed by the Flametongue Yearling. This is a really rough spot to be in. But if he's got an untapped land, he can... Well, even without an untapped land, I think he's got a Wrath of God in hand. He can destroy all of Leo's creatures, play the Dust Animus. I think just resolving a missed Monarch trigger there. And hopefully steal back the Monarch with Dust Animus. But a lot of the damage already done. And saving the Dust Animus, trying to set up the lifelink. Actually just going for it. So these cheap evasive creatures quite important for fighting over the Monarch. Unfortunately, Leo's got a ton of removal, so it's going to be really tough for Minier to steal back the Monarch here. So, takes out the Dust Animus. And playing Philia now to play around a counterspell. With Leo holding the Monarch, it looks like indefinitely it's going to be really tough for Minier to come back in this game. And looks like setting up for a Flage escape. Leo has got quite a lot of cards to play, but he's constrained on white mana, so... hard to turn down the Flage. That Mana Tithe was a godsend for not making us track day-night for the rest of the game. Oh, but Minier's got a Nimble Obstructionist. So, if he cycles this, he can counter the damage trigger. Which makes a bit of a difference in the life point battle. But I think just resolving how the cycling interacts with Escaping Flage. So, Escaping Flage is just like casting a spell. And the... yeah, so not going for the cycle here. I think he was speculating on whether there was a way to keep Flage from sticking around using the Obstructionist. And more importantly, just playing it as a flying attacker that can try and steal back the Monarch. Oh, Elspeth under the Shelldock Isle is nice. That's going to be... if Minier can live a few turns, that's a great way to regain control of the battlefield. And Gideon struggling as a Planeswalker that does not play defense very well. But likely just cashing it in for a token here. So Philia can flicker the token, which is pretty rough as an interaction. I think. However, it is going to cost Leo a bit of resources to kill the Gideon this turn, as he'd rather be taking the Monarch. So he can use the Flage trigger to deal 3 to the Gideon, finish it off with the Philia. The Flage connects and steals the Monarch, so he can set it up so that he does both, and he's got to also have some consideration to... I think he's just got lethal this turn, so that was a risky move from Manir, and got punished by Leo's draw, so game 1 goes to Leo. These haste threats and man lands really good in the face of mechanics like Monarch. And a nice aggressive start with the Hired Claw this time. Hired Claw, a card that is quite efficient and can suffer in the face of blockers, but against a controlling opponent, especially with counterspells, it's a great way to spend mana without opening yourself up to mana leak. And Manir once again just passing. Looks like he's got a Mana Tithe in his hand, so Leo correct to be playing around the counter spells by just investing mana on activated abilities instead. He's got to be a bit wary early in the game of committing too much into one creature that can get taken out by a Swords to Plowshares. I mean, a Path to Exile. And a lot of extra damage going on with this Hired Claw, so deals 1 when it attacks, would be dealing 2, but he can use the ability before damage to make it deal 3, so 4 damage all up. And fully committed to not getting counterspelled, not overextending into a Wrath of God effect. And Manir's got a flash threat to make sure he's still making up the mana. But it's not going to be very relevant in the face of this Hired Claw. If Manir can deal with that, he's going to have the game pretty well locked up, as he's got some counter magic, he's got a Wrath of God. And foretelling the Dust Animus again, so if he can hit his 5th land drop, that's a very nice threat against these aggressive decks. And representing a mana leak here. So I think he'd love to get Leo to invest 2 more mana into the Hired Claw and then path it, as that sets Leo back quite a lot in terms of mana efficiency, but I think as a 3-4, he's quite happy with it. I don't think he feels too compelled to grow it any further. He can play multiple 2-mana spells to fight through counter spells. And he's also got the out of just animating the Bivouac. So still playing very carefully around counterspells and rats. Hasn't exposed himself to Mana Leak yet. And Manir can't ignore this forever. It's hitting him for 4 a turn. If he doesn't hit an untapped land for the Dust Animus, he's not going to have a good way to block it. And with the amount of removal in Leo's deck, it's pretty hard to be leaning on a creature that heavily. So, if Manir fires off the Wrath of God here, it looks quite inefficient, but it would pull all of Leo's aggression off of the board. But it looks like he's going to lean on the Dust Animus, see if Leo has a removal spell for it. We do not have any lifelink or flying counters on hand. And it doesn't look like Leo's got a clean answer to it. He's got Flage and Paragoyf, which both can't deal 5 damage. He can level up the Hired Claw to a 4-5 so that it survives an attack, and Manir will have to deal with it at some point. He won't be able to block the 4-5 with the Dust Animus, as Leo can put another counter on it. And if Manir goes for the block, Leo can follow it up with Flage, and once again, he's not too exposed to the Wrath of God. He's only got 1 creature in play. So, puts another counter, neither creature dies. Manir gains 4 life. And there's Flage to finish it off. Oh, but this might be the time for Mana Leak. There's Mana Tithe. Very unlikely Manir was going to be able to line that one up against anything else. Now he just needs to find a way to deal with this Hired Claw. I'm not sure of the life totals, but I don't think Manir can just race it with damage and lifelink. So sends it in. And just playing a reactive game. And here's Lelia. So finally committing a bit more to the board. And I believe this is a Spell Queller promo. So, Spell Queller, a bit of a rough card to have here with Wrath of God as Minear's last spell. He really doesn't want to cast Wrath with the Spell Queller on board, as it'll give Leo the first shot at rebuilding afterwards. If Minear can just line up a removal spell for the Hired Claw, he's really in the clear this game. And Leo just using the Charming Prince for life gain. And Minear gets some serious damage in the air. He's doing alright in the race. I wish we could have the life totals on screen for you now. And I think Leo has some consideration towards removing the Spell Queller. It gets him back the Lelia, but he's also got to be a bit wary of a Wrath of God, as that would effectively be committing more resources to the board. And I think also he's got some consideration to whether he can just win the game this turn. So here's the Emperor, likely taking out the Dust Animus. So big difference in the race. Minear would love to Wrath here, but the Spell Queller is really rough for him. Oh, Elspeth is nice. That's a card that's very hard to beat without flyers. And if he can untap with Elspeth, odds are Elspeth plus a Wrath of God can overcome anything that Leo's got going on. So just going face with the Spell Queller. Not concerned about the plus counters from the Wandering Emperor. And here's a very nice Elspeth. Chump blockers for days. This is the perfect top end for Minear's slow strategy. This is the kind of card that he wants to draw the game out in order to cast. Very hard to come back against an Elspeth without a big flyer already in play. And I think Leo, he's got the Guide of Souls. If he can get 3 energy, he can surprise give something flying, and if Minier doesn't leave back the Spell Queller to block, then his Elspeth will be toast. So that looks like the best angle for Leo to take back control of the game right now. But he's a bit loath to commit more creatures into the board. If his Guide of Souls gets swept up in the Wrath of God, then that's probably his only flying threat that he's going to draw this game. But I believe that's a Guide of Souls. That's a Lingering Souls, so if so, Leo can play Guide of Souls into... If he has a spell that makes 2 tokens, the Wandering Emperor makes the 3rd one. That gets him enough energy to kill Elspeth with the Hired Claw, and then he's back in control of the game again. The question is that a spell that can make 2 creatures? Oh, it is! So Leo gets 3 energy, jumps the Hired Claw, Spell Claw is not there to block. This is devastating. He gets to take out the Elspeth this turn. And Spell Queller continuing to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So it looks like Charming Prince is getting jumped in the air. Becomes a 4/4 with flying. Gets Elspeth down to 1. Or some consideration about how he wants to do things. Alright, just loading up on the Hired Claw. And Elspeth has been dealt with, which is really devastating here. Hired Claw's trigger deals 1 to Minier, so Leo can level it up. And a Wrath of God does a lot here, but it doesn't get Minier ahead. This is really tough. He doesn't want to pull the trigger on the Wrath of God because it would leave him still behind. So, holding off for a turn. Minear just seeing if he can assemble a second spell to follow the Wrath of God up with, but it's going to be tough. And the Overlord also very good against Wrath of God. We've got Pyroglyph to take out the Spellcaller. This is actually not so bad for Minear. He's got an opportunity now. If he can survive this turn, his Wrath of God is going to actually clean things up. The question is just whether he'll survive this turn. So Leo only sending in 4 creatures. Lelia exiles a card. Hired Claw deals 1 direct damage. Just sticking with these. So he's got the 2/2 from the Wandering Emperor, the Charming Prince, and the Hired Claw. Likely all going to be chump blocked. The rest represents 4 in the air. So it'll be 5 damage total to Minear. And with Lyra hitting his second energy, very unlikely Minear's going to be able to survive a second turn through chump blocking. So almost definitely going to fire off the Wrath here. So cleans up the board, buys himself some time. Didn't top deck a spell to pair it with, so he's going to need to find something really good in the next few turns to wrestle control of the game. Otherwise, the Overlord is going to come off countdown. And Flayage is ready, of course. Looks like it's got to be this turn. And it's just a Jace. Really rough for Minear. He exposed himself to Leo's creature removal, and things didn't quite line up with the Wrath of God. And just doing some checking if he can organize lethal this turn. So, Imperial Recruiter, likely to be getting a haste threat. Some calculus about how he plays back against anything that Mynir could top deck. And looks like Filia is a safer option. So, if Mynir's got another Wrath of God, it would clear up the Overlord and the Flage here. So, I think Leo just wants a little something to rebuild after a Wrath. But it's just a land. Leo takes the game and the match, and he's off to the finals against Alex. Lined everything up quite nicely. And all of these creature removal spells, often at a bit of a risk of being blank against these creature light decks, but Mynir's Spell Queller and other important creatures manage to pay off the creature removal. So, slow start here. A tap land and no turn 2 play out of Alex. And a bit of a slow value creature here. This is the kind of thing you often want to snipe before it gets going. And Leo's going to do just that. So, maintaining parity on board position. Leo's got a good window here to play a 3-drop and gain some momentum in the game. And just starting things off with Kellen. Levels it up. Oh, and paying full price for the Stoke the Flames there. Looks like both players are pretty loaded up on removal. First one that can stick a creature and get things going is going to have a good advantage in how the game's shaping up. See, Leo's got a Pyrogoyf that he'll likely want to save for when Alex has got a creature. Oh, and this is a fantastic threat here, so no good way to answer this. If Leo can take out the Elder Gargaroth, he's going to be way ahead here. But it doesn't look like he's got the means to. He's got a Pyrogoyf that will only hit for 2 damage. I think he's got to have some consideration to setting up a way to block it. But that's extremely risky. So it's looking like he's just going to have to develop out his board and hope that Alex's Gargaroth doesn't run away with the game too quickly. Vigilance, Reach, and Trample, all very important here. We'll likely see Alex might be going for making 3/3s here, as drawing cards is pretty good, but having a creature he can use the maps on that he's not worried about getting removed is maybe a higher priority. So starting off with the Primeval Titan. A card that is trickier to put together in Limited than in Constructed, but we see Alex has got a Kessig Wolfrun already in play, which is one of the better cards to tutor with the Primeval Titan. So just getting a Surveil land. And Leo going ahead and doing his shuffling as well to save time. So Mind Collapse, not quite what Alex wants here, but it's pretty hard to turn down any spell. Five damage, not enough to deal with the Overlord. Leo hasn't really presented anything else that he particularly wants the 5 damage against. And see if Alex is willing to trade off his Elder Gargaroth for the board. So because he hasn't got any mana up, he's not representing a removal spell that could disrupt things. He's got the option of waiting till next turn so he can use the maps and the Mind Collapse to make it much harder to kill on blocks. But then he's taking a gamble on whether Leo's got a removal spell. And given that Leo kept on top, quite likely he's got something to answer the Gargaroth. And Alex doesn't have to be in a big rush. The Kessig Wolf run, while it doesn't boost the toughness of the creature, being able to activate it for 5 extra damage, essentially, each turn, he might want to maximize the usage of that to close the game out before the Overlord can take over the game. So just sitting back, probably be sending in the Gargaroth next turn, rather. A little miracle action on the Philia, so he can give the Philia haste, which lets him flicker the Paragoyf. So Paragoyf deals 3 damage now. Philia can flicker it at the cost of Philia dying, so the Werewolf gives Philia haste. Philia flickers the Paragoyf. The Paragoyf finishes off the Gargaroth. Not ideal for Leo, as he's still giving Alex 1 trigger of the Gargaroth. But the Gargaroth is such a menace, and he's got to have some expectation that he's not going to be able to deal with it by blocking. So, easy block here. Tough to pick a mode, as it's looking like the card draw is what he wants to line up here, but without the Gargaroth, he doesn't have a reach creature. He'd like to have some way of closing out the game to get in under the Overlord. So, quite tempting to go for making a 3-3 here. But, yeah, when you're empty-handed, it's pretty hard to turn down the card draw, so... And with only creature, land, and instant in graveyard, I think the Gargaroth would be surviving that. Oh, of course, but the Philia was buffed up to a 3-2, so did indeed trade with the Gargaroth. And Alex still pretty happy with not blocking the Philia with the Primeval Titan, as that would have stopped him from getting a card off the Gargaroth. And looks like he's drawn a Huntmaster of the Fells, which is also quite a nice creature. So he's got a removal spell and another threat. The Primeval Titan is going to find him even more mana. But red-green not known for being able to deal with a 6/6 Overlord, so unless Alex has got a enchantment removal spell, unlikely he's going to be able to kill Leo's 6/6, at which point his only way to manage it is with blocking, which is quite a risky proposition. There's a lot of removal spells Leo could have to make that not a viable way of managing it. And Leo, considering the multi-block, he'd love to stay alive and make sure that Alex doesn't have a good way to block the Overlord. He can't afford to go down too low against a Kessig Wolfrun, as that represents a lot of surprise trample damage to close the game out. So it goes for a triple block there. Oh, and the Mind Collapse breaks it up. Cast for free by sacrificing a mountain. So Leo takes 4 trample damage, fails to kill the Primeval Titan. And Huntmaster of the Fells, another nice threat, resilient to removal. The Wolf token, a good target for the maps. And he's going to be beefing up the Huntmaster. So it brings it up to a 3/3, it transforms, it becomes a 5/5. And he's going to leave the Ghostfire Slice on top and activate the second map to get a second counter on the Huntmaster. And both plays Graveyard still just instant creature land, I believe. So Paragoyf only a 3/4, unable to attack into the Huntmaster, unless Leo can set up a sorcery or other way to get another type in the graveyard. And Alex's burn spells making racing quite complicated. He can swing for 15 trample damage next turn, so at the very minimum, Leo's got to leave back 1 blocker or threaten a removal spell. Oh, and it's Lelia. Showing up with too many large creatures around to have a fantastic impact. And Leo's Overlord, generally a great card to be unlocking. The 2/1s can't play defense as well as they usually can because of the Kessig Wolfrun granting trample. So we'll likely see Leo forced into blocking with the Paragoyf as he really doesn't want to let go of the Overlord. And every Primeval Titan trigger with the Wolf Run, Alex can convert that into a ton of damage if the game stalls out. So he can go for 14 trample damage here, plus 2 from the Huntmaster, so Leo absolutely has to block. And with the Overlord off the battlefield, Alex doesn't have much to concern about in a slower game. He can snipe the Laelia with Huntmaster. Paragoyf moves up to a 4-5, but still not threatening Alex's life total too hard as he's still on 19. And Leo going for a block here, trading the Paragoyf for the Wolf token. He is to some extent forced to deal with all of Alex's creatures, so if he can top deck a removal spell for the Huntmaster, at least he's turned off the Kessig Wolf Run. So Alex brings the Wolf up to 7, only gets 2 trample damage across, but he's really traded his creatures up for some of Leo's most valuable cards. Huntmaster transforms, kills the Laelia, deals 2 more to Leo. And Flage gains a bit of life, but I think Alex has still got lethal. So he can Ghostfire slice Leo back down to 12, and then Wolf Run adds another 8 damage. That's 12 from the Huntmaster. Or 14, rather. And gets in for lethal. So game 1 goes to Alex. Big green creatures, quite hard for red to interact with. We saw Paragoyf, normally a really exceptional card, struggled to line up against all of the 6/6s. And this time, a much more proactive start. And Unchecked Kellen can represent a bunch of extra cards for Leo and really get things going in the game. So, Alex had a tap land there, but led with the fetch land, representing maybe he's got a Fatal Push or something. So, if he can bait Leo into spending mana on the Kellen and take care of it this turn, then he'll be setting Leo behind quite far, but just going for the fetch land, so. Looks like Leo's got Ophelia he'd rather be flashing in or some other threat. Or more likely just didn't want to bother leveling up the Kellen as its triggered ability is not relevant with him having no mana or land plays. And it looks like Alex has got a Burst Lightning. So there goes 3 of Leo's mana, but he's got a Laelia here, and this is the right time for it. Attacks as a 3/3 this turn, going to be getting in for 4 next turn. It's going to be tough for Alex to set up a block on it, and he's got to stoke the flames. Oh, and a Ghostfire Slice. Very nice. And we see the importance of leaning on removal spells here. Leo's got an Oust, so while in theory Alex could have set up a blocker to try and survive there, the Oust would have put him way behind. So by not presenting any creatures worth removing, he's managed to gain massive tempo over Leo compared to if he'd risked it with a 3 or 4 mana creature. So going with Arlinn Kord here. Makes 2 blockers. If Leo spends an oust, he can deal with the Arlinn this turn. Not his ideal use for the oust, but it's pretty rough to leave your opponent with a Planeswalker. But Arlinn, not a Planeswalker that demands such an immediate answer. It'll likely be 3 or even 4 turns before Arlinn can make any more tokens. But he is going to snap off the oust here. Adeline and the 1/1 at Arlinn, so Alex can eat the 1/1 with the wolf, let the Arlinn die. Unfortunate to have lost the Planeswalker, but on balance, a pretty good move for keeping control of the board here. He just needs to set up some way to keep the Adeline under control. Oh, and Ouroboros. This is putting a ton of toughness in play. Leo's got to top deck a removal spell right now. His ability to continue to attack is really going to come down to right now. So, on the face of it, if he sends in Adeline, she'll be a 3/4. Alex could go for a block, but unlikely he wants to expose the Ouroboros, as that could be setting it up to get finished off by a red burn spell. So he would probably just block the 1/1 or jump the Adeline, but that's unlikely. Take at least 3 damage, and once he's untapped with Ouroboros, he can settle in for a longer game. So yeah, no block with the Ouroboros, doesn't want to risk it. Oh, and Leo does have a removal spell. Pumps the Adeline up to a 4/4. But a lot of work already done by the Ouroboros. These leftover 2/2s that Leo's got are going to struggle to convert into something meaningful. He's just leaning quite heavily on the Adeline right now. So levels up the Tree Speaker, can be tapped for 2 mana immediately. Oh, and a removal spell for the Werefox. So Leo sacrifices it to gain 2 life, but the Ouroboros is back. And now that the Wolf is a 4/4, it's got a block on the Adeline. Leo's got to go over the top with flyers or something like that, but very tough to keep up with the Ouroboros. Chump blocking not going to work due to Kessig Wolf Run once things start getting out of hand. And Alex is in no rush. He's got blockers, he's got the late game lined up. He's got a ton of mana. So starting off with the Primeval Titan. Just reconsulting the land distribution there. And Ouroboros really goes crazy with Kessig Wolf Run as well, so on a later turn, Alex could Kessig Wolf Run the Ouroboros, pump up its power. Would be quite excessive at this point, but it would be an extra 8+1 counters on all of his creatures. So pumps the Ouroboros up to 10 power, puts a ridiculous amount of power on the board. Leo scoops it up. That is game and match to Alex. Well done. Put together a real classic red-green strategy out of the classic Legacy Cube. Nicely done from Leo as well with the Boros mid-range. I'm looking forward to seeing this cube in action in the tournament. I hope you all enjoyed watching, and I'll see you all next time.